The ship was burning when it hit the mountain. Princess Aleph felt the impact throw her against the safety harness. Metal screamed around her. Fire erupted from the control panels. The world spun, then went dark. When she opened her eyes, she was lying in wreckage. The transport vessel had broken apart across a forested hillside. Trees she did not recognize surrounded her. The sky above was a strange shade of blue, dotted with white clouds. She had never seen clouds quite like these before. She tried to move and pain shot through her leg. Looking down, she saw purple blood seeping through her flight suit. A piece of metal had cut deep into her thigh. Her translator was broken. Her emergency beacon was flashing, but she had no idea if anyone would receive the signal. The planet she had crashed on was quarantined. It was called Earth by its inhabitants, and the Galactic Council had declared it off-limits centuries ago. The natives were considered primitive, dangerous, unpredictable. No civilized species was supposed to make contact with them. Now, Aleph was bleeding on their world. Alone and far from home, she managed to pull herself out of the wreckage. Every movement sent waves of pain through her body. She crawled to a nearby tree and pressed her back against it, breathing hard. The air here was different, thicker. It smelled of pine and smoke from her burning ship. She heard footsteps. Aleph reached for her sidearm, but it was gone. Lost somewhere in the crash. She had nothing to defend herself with. The footsteps grew closer, crunching through dead leaves and branches. A figure emerged from the trees. It was a human male. He was tall, with brown hair and a rough beard covering his jaw. He wore simple clothing made of fabric and animal hide. In his hands, he carried a primitive projectile weapon, what her people called a kinetic rifle. He stopped when he saw her. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Aleph knew she must look strange to him. Her skin was pale lavender. Her eyes were larger than human eyes, with silver irises. Her ears were pointed, and her hair was white as fresh snow. She expected him to run, or attack, or call for others of his kind. Instead, he lowered his weapon and walked toward her slowly. He held up his hands, showing her his palms. His face was calm, careful. He was trying to show her that he meant no harm. He knelt beside her and looked at her wounded leg. He made sound words in a language she could not understand. His voice was deep but gentle. He pointed at her leg, then at himself, then made a gesture like wrapping something. He wanted to help her. Aleph did not know what to do. Everything she had been taught said that humans were violent creatures. They had nearly destroyed their own world multiple times. They killed each other over resources, territory, and ideas. They were not to be trusted, but this human was looking at her with concern in his eyes. Real concern. He reached into a bag he carried and pulled out cloth and a bottle of liquid. He pointed at her leg again and raised his eyebrows, asking permission. She nodded. The human worked quickly. He cleaned her wound with the liquid, which stung badly. Aleph hissed in pain, and he paused, his eyes meeting hers. He said something soft, something that sounded like an apology. Then he continued, wrapping her leg tightly with the cloth. When he was done, he sat back and studied her face. He pointed at himself and spoke a single word. Jake, it was his name. Aleph touched her own chest. Aleph, she said. He smiled. It was a warm smile, and it made his rough face look kind. Jake stood and offered her his hand. She took it, and he helped her to her feet. Walking was painful, but possible now. He put her arm around his shoulders and supported her weight, guiding her through the forest. They walked for a long time. The sun moved across the sky. Aleph had no idea where he was taking her, but she had no choice except to trust him. She was wounded on a strange world, and this human was the only one who had shown her kindness. They reached a small structure made of wood. A cabin, she realized. primitive but sturdy. Smoke rose from a chimney. Jake helped her inside and set her down on a soft surface covered in animal furs. The cabin was simple. There was a fire burning in a stone hearth. Shelves held books and tools. Animal heads hung on the walls hunting trophies, she guessed. Everything was made by hand, crafted with care. Jake brought her water and food. The water was clean and cold. The food was cooked meat and some kind of plant material. She ate carefully, not knowing if her body could process human food. But she was hungry, and she had no other options. Over the next few days, Jake cared for her. He changed her bandages. He brought her medicine from a small kit with a red cross on it. He tried to communicate with her using gestures and drawings. Slowly, she began to understand simple things. Yes, no, food, water, sleep. He never asked her for anything. He never threatened her. He simply helped her because she needed help. On the fourth day, her emergency beacon finally drew attention, but not from her people. 3 Corvathi, bounty hunters, landed near the crashed ship. They were the ones who had attacked her transport in the first place. They worked for enemies of her mother, enemies who wanted to use Aleph as leverage against the Valorian throne. Jake saw their ship descend from the sky. He watched through a window as the hunters began searching the forest, following her trail. Aleph tried to tell him to run. She used every gesture she could think of. She pointed at the hunters. She pointed at him. She made a motion like fleeing. Jake looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his kinetic rifle and walked to the door. He did not run. The bounty hunters had plasma weapons and combat armor. Jake had a hunting rifle and knowledge of the forest. The fight lasted less than an hour. Aleph heard the shots echoing through the trees. She heard screams that were not human. When Jake returned to the cabin, he was bleeding from a wound on his arm. But he was alive. The hunters were not. He sat down heavily in a chair and began bandaging his own wound. Aleph stared at him, unable to believe what had just happened. This primitive human, with his simple weapon, had killed 3 Corvathi warriors. He looked up and saw her staring. He shrugged, as if killing 3 alien hunters was just another day in the mountains. At that moment, Aleph realized that everything she had been taught about humans was wrong. The Valorian rescue ships arrived on the 7th day. Aleph heard them before she saw them. The deep hum of gravity drives filled the air, and shadows passed over the cabin windows. She limped to the door and looked up at the sky. 3 silver vessels hovered above the forest, their hulls gleaming in the morning sun. Jake stood beside her, his rifle in his hands. He watched the ships with narrowed eyes. He did not look afraid. He looked ready. Aleph put her hand on his arm and shook her head. She pointed at the ships and then at herself. She touched her chest over her heart. These were her people. They had come to take her home. The rescue team landed in a clearing near the cabin. Soldiers in white armor spread out through the trees, weapons raised. A medical officer rushed toward Aleph, scanner in hand. Behind them came Commander Vex, the captain of her mother's personal guard. Vex stopped when he saw Jake. The commander was 7 feet tall, with blue skin and 4 arms. He had served the royal family for 200 years. He had seen countless species across the galaxy. But something about the human made him pause. Maybe it was the way Jake stood, relaxed but alert, his primitive weapon still in his hands. No fear in his eyes, even though he was surrounded by soldiers who could kill him in an instant. Maybe it was the 3 dead Corvathi hunters that Vex's team had found in the forest. Their armor had been pierced by simple metal projectiles. One had been killed with a blade. Another had died from a broken neck. A primitive human had done this, alone, with tools that Vex's people had stopped using 10,000 years ago. Aleph spoke quickly, explaining everything in her native language. She told Vex how Jake had found her, how he had treated her wounds, How he had fought the hunters when they came. How he had protected her without knowing who she was or what he might gain from it. Vex listened in silence. When she finished, he looked at Jake for a long time. "We will take him with us," Vex said finally. "The Queen will want to meet him." Aleph translated this as best she could, using gestures and the few words Jake had taught her. "Home," she sighed. "Come." Safe. Jake hesitated. He looked back at his cabin, at the mountains he called home. Then he looked at Aleph. She could see him thinking, weighing his choices. Finally, he nodded. The journey to Valaria took 3 days. Jake spent most of it staring out the windows of the ship, watching the stars stream past. Aleph sat with him when she could, trying to teach him words from her language. He learned quickly, much more quickly than she expected. By the time they reached Valaria, he could speak simple sentences. Enough to ask questions. Enough to understand answers. The royal planet was beautiful. Silver cities rose from purple forests. Rivers of crystal-clear water wound through valleys of flowers that glowed in the twilight. Moons hung in the sky like jewels, each one home to millions of people. Jake stared at it all with wide eyes. He had never seen anything like this. He had spent his life in the mountains of Earth, hunting and fishing and living alone. Now he was looking at a civilization that spanned 40 star systems. "Beautiful," he said quietly. It was one of the first Valerian words he had learned. Aleph smiled. "Yes, home." They landed at the royal palace, a massive structure of white stone and golden spires. Guards in ceremonial armor lined the entrance. Servants hurried forward to attend to the princess. News of her rescue had spread across the empire, and crowds had gathered to see her return. But all eyes turned to Jake. He walked beside Aleph, still wearing his simple earth clothing. His beard had grown longer during the journey. He looked rough and wild compared to the elegant Valorians around him. But he walked with his head high, meeting the stares without flinching. Queen Serranis waited in the throne room. She was tall and regal, with silver hair that fell past her shoulders. Her eyes were the same shade as her daughter's, but colder, sharper. She wore robes of deep purple, and a crown of living crystal rested on her brow. Aleph rushed forward and embraced her mother. The queen held her daughter tightly, and for a moment her cold expression softened. She had feared the worst when Elith's ship had gone silent. She had prepared herself for grief. Instead, her daughter had returned alive. Because of this human. Queen Serranis released Aleph and turned her gaze to Jake. He stood before her, neither bowing nor kneeling. He did not know the proper customs, and even if he did, Aleph suspected he would not follow them. The queen studied him for a long moment. Then she spoke, and her words were translated through a device on her collar. "You saved my daughter's life." Jake nodded. "She was hurt. I helped. You killed 3 Kavathi bounty hunters. They were going to take her. I stopped them." The queen's eyes narrowed slightly. "Do you know who she is?" "Who I am? I know now." "Didn't know then." "Wouldn't have mattered." Something flickered in the queen's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or curiosity. She had expected many things from this human. Arrogance, fear, demands for reward. Instead, she found simple honesty. "What do you want?" she asked. "Name your price. I will grant you anything within my power." Jake was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke. "I want to go home." The throne room fell silent. Servants and guards exchanged glances. Aleph felt her heart sink, though she did not fully understand why Queen Serranis tilted her head. "Home? To Earth? Yes, you could have wealth, status, a place in my court. You could live for centuries with our medicine. And you want to return to your primitive world." Jake met her gaze steadily. "It's my home, my mountains, my sky. I don't belong here." The queen was silent for a long time. Then she smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "You are tired from your journey. Rest tonight. We will speak more tomorrow." She waved her hand, and servants came forward to guide Jake to guest quarters. He glanced back at Aleph as he left, and she saw the question in his eyes. She wished she could answer it. That night, Queen Serranis watched the security footage from Jake's cabin. She watched him carry Aleph through a forest fire when the crashed ship had set the woods ablaze. She watched him stand between her daughter and plasma fire, using a wooden door as a shield. She watched him refuse to flee even when escape was possible, and she made her decision. The next morning, when Jake asked again to go home, the queen smiled and told him that arrangements were being made. When he asked again a week later, she said the same thing. And again, the week after that, the weeks turned into months. Jake was given fine rooms and rich food. He was offered anything he desired. But every time he asked to leave, he was told to wait. Soon, they said. Very soon, he was not a prisoner. But he was not free. And slowly, Jake began to understand the truth. The queen had no intention of letting him go. Jake stood at the window of his chambers, looking out at the alien sky. 6 months had passed since he had arrived on Valoria. 6 months of waiting. 6 months of polite excuses and empty promises. The view from his window was beautiful crystal towers catching the light of 3 moons, gardens of glowing flowers stretching to the horizon. But beauty meant nothing when you were trapped. His rooms were larger than his entire cabin back on Earth. The bed was softer than anything he had ever slept on. The food was prepared by royal chefs. Servants came whenever he called. He had been given clothes made of fabric that shifted color with his mood. He had been offered jewels, vehicles, anything he wanted. Everything except his freedom. A chime sounded at his door. Jake already knew who it was. Aleph visited him every day, sometimes twice. She was the only person in the palace who seemed to understand his frustration. The only one who seemed to care. "Come in," he said. The door slid open, and Aleph entered. She was dressed simply today, in a white gown that flowed like water around her. Her silver eyes found his immediately, and he saw the guilt there. It was always there now. "I spoke with my mother again," she said. Her Valorian was slow and careful. She knew Jake was still learning, and she wanted him to understand every word. "Let me guess. More delays. More excuses." Aleph lowered her eyes. "She says the Galactic Council is investigating the Korvathi attack. She says it would be dangerous to return you to Earth while the investigation continues. They might follow you. Use you to find your world." Jake laughed, but there was no humor in it. "They already know where Earth is. It's quarantined. Everyone knows where it is. I know." Aleph moved closer, standing beside him at the window. "I know her reasons are false. I have tried to change her mind, but she will not listen to me." Jake was quiet for a moment. Then he asked the question he had been avoiding for weeks. "Why? Why does she want to keep me here?" Aleph took a deep breath. "Because she is afraid of you." Jake turned to look at her. "Afraid? She has armies, ships, weapons that could destroy my entire planet. Why would she be afraid of me? Because of what you did." Elith's voice was soft but steady. "You saved my life with nothing but primitive tools and your own body. You killed 3 Korvathi hunters who had better weapons, better armor, better training. You did what our royal guard could not do." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "My mother has ruled for 300 years. In all that time, she has never met anyone like you. Humans are supposed to be primitive, violent and stupid, fighting among themselves while the galaxy moves forward without them. That is what the Council says. That is what everyone believes. But you showed her something different. You showed her that a human with nothing but courage and will can defeat enemies that should be far beyond him. And you did it without asking for anything in return. No payment. No loyalty oaths. No political games. Jake frowned. I still don't understand. Why is that scary? Aleph turned to face him fully. Because she cannot control it. She cannot buy it or command it. You helped me because you wanted to, not because you had to. That kind of loyalty, that kind of strength, it is rare in the galaxy. My mother wants it for herself, for our family, but she knows she cannot force it. So she keeps me here, Jake said slowly, hoping that if she waits long enough, I will become loyal to her on my own. Yes, Jake was silent for a long time. Outside, the moons were setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. It was beautiful. Everything here was beautiful, and none of it was his. There's something else, Aleph said quietly. Something she has not told you. Jake looked at her. The Galactic Council fears humans. Not just because of your violence, but because of your potential. Your species adapts faster than any other in known space. You can survive in conditions that would kill most beings. You breed quickly, learn quickly, and when you fight, you do not stop until you win or die. She swallowed hard. The Council has debated for centuries what to do about Earth. Some want to destroy it before humans can reach the stars. Others want to wait and see. But everyone agrees on one thing: humans must never learn that the galaxy is watching them. Jake felt cold. And if I go back, I might tell people what I've seen. Yes, my mother could face punishment from the Council for allowing a human to leave with knowledge of alien life. It could damage our standing, our treaties, our trade. And if the Council decides that humans are too great a risk. She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. Jake understood now. He was trapped not just by the Queen's desire, but by politics that spanned 1,000 worlds. His freedom could cost Earth everything. He turned back to the window. So, what do I do? Stay here forever? Become some kind of pet for your mother? No. Ela's voice was firm. That is not what I want. And I do not believe it is truly what my mother wants either. She stepped closer, and Jake felt her hand touch his arm. I think she is waiting for you to prove yourself. To show her that you can be trusted with the truth. That you will not betray us if she lets you go. How am I supposed to do that? Aleph shook her head. I do not know. But I know you, Jake Lawson. You found a way to save me when there was no way. You found a way to defeat enemies who should have killed you. You will find a way through this too. Jake looked at her. Her silver eyes were bright with something he could not name. Hope, maybe. Or faith. He remembered the mountains of Montana, the cold mornings, the sound of wind through pine trees, the feeling of freedom that came from knowing every trail, every stream, every hidden place. He would see them again. Somehow. Thank you, he said quietly, for being honest with me, for visiting me when you don't have to. Alice smiled, and it made her whole face light up. You saved my life. Visiting you is the least I can do. She squeezed his arm gently, then stepped back. Be patient, she said. Be watchful, and be ready. I do not think you will be waiting much longer. Jake did not know what she meant, but something in her voice made him believe her. That night, as he lay in his soft bed and stared at the alien ceiling, Jake made a decision. He would stop asking to leave. He would stop fighting against his situation. Instead, he would learn. He would watch. He would wait, and when the moment came, whatever moment Alice was hinting at, he would be ready. Outside his window, the 3 moons rose again, casting silver light across the sleeping city. Somewhere in the palace, Queen Saranis was making plans of her own. And in the shadows, forces were gathering that would soon test everyone's loyalty. Jake did not know it yet, but his patience was about to be rewarded. just not in the way he expected. The attack came at midnight. Jake was asleep when the first explosion shook the palace. He rolled out of bed instantly, years of survival instincts taking over before his mind was fully awake. Red lights flashed in his chambers. Alarms screamed through the halls. He grabbed the small knife he had hidden under his mattress, simple tool he had taken from the kitchens weeks ago. It was not much of a weapon, but it was better than nothing. The door to his chambers burst open. Jake raised the knife, ready to fight. Commander Vex stood in the doorway. The four-armed warrior was bleeding from a wound on his chest. His white armor was scorched and cracked. Behind him, Jake could hear plasma fire and screaming. "Human," Vex said, his voice tight with pain. "You must hide. The palace is under attack." "Who?" Jake demanded. "Noble faction. They oppose the Queen's reforms. They have been planning this for years." Vex stumbled and Jake caught him before he could fall. "Half the royal guard has betrayed us. The Queen is trapped in the throne room. The princess," his voice broke. "Where is Aleph?" Jake asked sharply. "They took her. Lord Krath's soldiers. They are holding her in the Eastern Tower as leverage against the Queen." Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. Not fear, something else. Something harder. "Can you fight?" he asked Vex. The commander shook his head. "My wounds are too severe. I can barely walk." Jake helped him to a chair. Then he turned toward the door. "What are you doing?" Vex asked, getting her back. Vex stared at him. "You are one human with a kitchen knife. They have plasma weapons, combat armor, dozens of soldiers." Jake looked back at him, and something in his eyes made the ancient warrior fall silent. "I've killed better," Jake said. Then he was gone. The palace was chaos. Fires burned in the corridors. Bodies lay on the marble floors, guards and rebels alike. Jake moved through the shadows, avoiding the main halls where fighting was heaviest. He had spent months learning the palace, memorizing the routes that servants used, the hidden passages that connected different wings. Now that knowledge saved his life. He found the maintenance tunnels behind a tapestry in an abandoned corridor. The tunnels were dark and narrow, filled with pipes and cables that carried power throughout the palace. Jake crawled through them, following the map in his memory toward the Eastern Tower. Along the way, he collected what he could. A plasma cutter from a maintenance station, a length of heavy cable, a fire extinguisher, tools that most people would overlook. But Jake was not most people. He reached the tower through a ventilation shaft that opened into an empty storage room. He could hear voices outside, guards speaking in Valorian. At least 6 of them, based on the different voices. Jake waited, listened, planned. When he moved fast. The first guard died before he knew Jake was there. The plasma cutter went through his neck like butter. The second guard turned at the sound, and Jake threw the fire extinguisher at his face. The heavy metal cylinder shattered his visor and knocked him unconscious. The third guard fired his plasma rifle. Jake was already moving, ducking behind a pillar as the shot scorched the air where he had been. He swung the cable like a whip, wrapping it around the guard's weapon and yanking it from his hands. Before the guard could react, Jake was on him, driving the knife into the gap between his helmet and his chest plate. 3 down. 3 to go. The remaining guards were smarter. They spread out, using cover, firing in coordinated bursts. They had been trained for combat. They knew how to fight as a team, but they had never fought a human before. Jake used the chaos against them. He set fire to a curtain, filling the corridor with smoke. He threw furniture to create distractions. He attacked from angles they did not expect, using the walls and ceiling as much as the floor. He was not stronger than them, not faster, but he was unpredictable. and in combat, unpredictable was deadly. The last guard fell with Jake's knife in his throat. Jake stood over him, breathing hard. Blood ran down his arm from a wound he did not remember receiving. His body ached. His vision was starting to blur, but he was not done. He found Aleph in a room at the top of the tower. She was bound to a chair, her wrists tied behind her back. A guard stood over her with a weapon pointed at her head. Lord Krath himself was there too, a tall Valorian noble with cruel eyes and a sneer on his face. "Stop," Krath commanded when Jake entered. "One more step and she dies." Jake stopped. He looked at Aleph. Her silver eyes were wide, but not with fear. With something else. "Are you hurt?" he asked her. She shook her head slightly. Krath laughed. "The human pet has come to rescue his princess." How touching. How utterly stupid. Jake did not look at him. He kept his eyes on Aleph. "When I move, close your eyes." Alice blinked. Then she nodded. Krath frowned. "What are you?" Jake moved. He did not go for Krath. He did not go for the guard. He grabbed the edge of his torn shirt and threw it at the light panel on the ceiling. The panel shattered, plunging the room into darkness. In the darkness, Jake was just a shadow. But his enemies were blind. He heard the guard fire, but the shot went wide. He was aiming where Jake had been, not where he was. Jake crossed the distance in 3 steps, grabbed the guard's weapon arm, and broke it at the elbow. The guard screamed. Jake silenced him with a blow to the throat. Krath tried to run. Jake caught him before he reached the door. "Please," the noble begged. "I have wealth, power. I can give you anything you want. Let me go, and I will make you rich beyond imagination." Jake looked at him for a long moment. Then he thought about Aleph, bound to a chair with a weapon at her head. He thought about the bodies in the corridor, the guards who had died loyal to the queen, the chaos and destruction that this man had caused. "No," Jake said. When the emergency lights finally came on, Krath was unconscious on the floor. Jake had already freed Aleph from her bonds. She stood beside him, rubbing her wrists, staring at the destruction around them. "You came for me," she said softly. "You told me to be ready." She laughed, but there were tears in her eyes. "I meant for something small. A test, a chance to prove yourself. Not this. This is what was needed." Aleph looked at him then, really looked at him. And Jake saw something in her expression that he had not seen before. It was more than gratitude, more than friendship, but there was no time for that now. "Your mother," Jake said. "Vex told me she's trapped." Alep's expression hardened. "Then we go to her." Together, they fought their way through the palace. Aleph took a weapon from one of the fallen guards and proved that she was not helpless. She was a princess, but she had been trained in combat since childhood. Side by side, they cleared corridor after corridor. When they reached the throne room, the coup was already failing. The rebels had expected an easy victory, but the queen's loyal forces had rallied. The arrival of Jake and Aleph, attacking from behind, broke the remaining resistance. It was over in 17 minutes. Lord Krath and his conspirators were taken prisoner. The wounded were carried to medical stations. The dead were honored with silence, and Jake stood in the throne room, covered in blood that was not his own, and met the eyes of the queen. She looked at him for a long time. Then, slowly, she nodded. "We need to talk," she said. 3 days after the uprising, Queen Serane summoned Jake to her private chambers. The palace was still recovering. Repair crews worked through the nights, fixing damaged walls and replacing shattered windows. The bodies had been removed, but the scorch marks remained dark, reminders of how close the royal family had come to destruction. Jake walked through the halls alone. Guards nodded to him as he passed. Servants stepped aside with respect in their eyes. Word had spread of what he had done. The human who had saved the princess not once, but twice. The primitive who had killed a dozen trained soldiers with nothing but a knife and his wits. He was not a prisoner anymore. He was something else now. Something the palace had never seen before. The queen's private chambers were simple compared to the rest of the palace. No golden decorations. No glowing crystals. Just soft light, comfortable furniture, and walls lined with books. It looked like a place where someone actually lived, not just ruled. Queen Serana's sat by a window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. She looked tired. The crown was gone from her head. Her silver hair was loose around her shoulders. She looked less like a queen and more like a mother. "Sit," she said, gesturing to a chair across from her. "Please." Jake sat. He said nothing. He had learned that silence was often more valuable than words. The queen did not look at him immediately. She kept her gaze on the sunset, her expression thoughtful. "I owe you an apology," she said finally. Jake raised an eyebrow but remained silent. "I kept you here against your will. I told myself it was for the good of my empire, for the safety of your world. But those were lies." She turned to face him, and her silver eyes were heavy with something that might have been shame. "The truth is that I was afraid. Afraid of what you represented." "What do I represent?" Jake asked. The queen stood and walked to a shelf filled with small objects, gifts from distant worlds, keepsakes from a long life. She picked up a small crystal and turned it over in her hands. "For 300 years, I have ruled this empire. I have made alliances and broken them. I have fought wars and negotiated peace. I have seen civilizations rise and fall. And in all that time, I have never met anyone I could not understand." She looked at him. "Until you." Jake waited. "You came to us from a primitive world. You had no training, no advanced weapons, no reason to help my daughter. And yet you did. You risked your life for someone you had never met. Someone who was not even your species." She shook her head slowly. "At first, I thought it was stupidity, or perhaps some human form of madness. But then I watched the recordings. I saw you carry her through fire. I saw you stand against enemies who should have destroyed you. And I realized the truth." "What truth?" Jake asked. The queen set down the crystal and met his eyes directly. "You did it because it was right. Not because of duty or payment or fear. Simply because it was the right thing to do." She paused. "I have commanded millions of soldiers in my life. Loyal soldiers who would die for me without question. But I have never met one who would do what you did for no reason at all." She returned to her chair and sat down heavily. "That kind of spirit cannot be bought or commanded. It can only be given freely. And I wanted it. I wanted it so badly that I was willing to cage you to keep it." Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke. "I understand why you did it. I'm not angry." The queen looked surprised. "You should be. I took your freedom." "You also saved my life," Jake said. "When your ships came to Earth, your people could have killed me. Instead, they brought me here. Gave me food, medicine, a warm bed. I've slept in worse places." A small smile crossed the queen's face. It made her look younger. "And after all that," she said, "you still fought for us. You could have hidden during the attack. You could have escaped in the chaos. Instead, you fought through a palace full of enemies to save my daughter. Then you fought to save me." "Aleph is my friend," Jake said simply. "You're her mother." It wasn't complicated. The queen laughed softly. "For you, perhaps? For the rest of the galaxy, nothing is ever that simple." She leaned forward, her expression becoming serious. "I am going to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly, without thinking about what I want to hear. Can you do that?" Jake nodded. "What do you want?" It was the same question she had asked him months ago in the throne room. But this time, something was different. This time, she was truly asking. Jake thought about it. He thought about his cabin in the mountains, the smell of pine trees, the sound of rivers, the feeling of earth beneath his feet. He thought about home, but he also thought about Aleph, her silver eyes, her kindness, the way she had visited him every day, even when she did not have to, the way she had fought beside him during the uprising, trusting him completely. He thought about the galaxy he had seen, the stars, the moons, the civilizations that stretched across space, a universe so much bigger than anything he had imagined. "I want to go home," he said finally. "But I don't want this to be the end." The Queen tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "I want to see my mountains again, sleep in my own bed, breathe my own air. But I also want—" He struggled to find the words. "I want to know that this meant something, that it wasn't just a strange dream I had once." The Queen studied him for a long time. Then she reached into her robes and pulled out a small device. It was silver, shaped like a teardrop, small enough to fit in his palm. "This is a direct communication link to the palace. It connects only to me and to Aleph. No one else in the galaxy has one like it." She held it out to him. "Take it. Go home to your mountains. Live your life as you choose. But know that if you ever need anything, if your world ever faces a threat it cannot handle alone, Valoria will answer." Jake took the device. It was warm in his hand. "Why?" he asked. The Queen smiled. This time, it reached her eyes. "Because you showed me something I have forgotten. Something the galaxy has forgotten. That courage and kindness do not require technology or treaties or politics. They require only a heart willing to act." She stood and placed her hand on his shoulder. "Go home, Jake Lawson. You have earned it. But know that you will always be welcome here. Always." 2 days later, Jake stood in the launch bay of the Royal Palace. A small ship waited for him, fast, quiet, and programmed with coordinates to Earth. His few belongings were already aboard. Alice stood before him, her white dress billowing in the wind from the open bay doors. Her eyes were bright with tears she was trying not to shed. "I will miss you," she said. "I'll miss you too." She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Jake held her, feeling the warmth of her against him. "Visit me sometime," he said quietly. Aleph laughed through her tears. A princess visiting a quarantined world? The council would lose their minds. You could come up with an excuse. A scientific expedition. A diplomatic error. He smiled. "You're smart. You'll think of something." She pulled back and looked at him. Then, surprising them both, she leaned up and kissed his cheek. "I will find a way," she whispered. Jake climbed into the ship. As the engines hummed to life, he looked out the window one last time. Aleph stood in the bay, her hand raised in farewell. Behind her, Queen Saranes watched from a balcony high above. The ship rose into the sky. The palace grew smaller. The planet shrank to a sphere of purple and silver, and then the stars swallowed him whole. 3 days later, Jake Lawson landed in a clearing in the Montana mountains. He stepped out of the ship and breathed deep. Pine trees, cold air, the sound of a river in the distance. Home. He watched the ship rise and vanish into the clouds, returning to a galaxy that most of Earth would never know existed. In his pocket, the silver device hummed softly against his chest. He was alone again. But not really, because somewhere out there, among the stars, a princess was already planning her next visit. A queen was reconsidering everything she thought she knew about humans. And the galaxy itself was slowly waking up to a truth it had ignored for far too long. Humans were not primitive. They were just getting started.